welcome to today's episode of the Comical Heathen. This is your host, Dr. Jerry Jaffe, the world's most highly educated stand-up comedian. This is my podcast, and welcome to it. I started this podcast about 18 months ago. It is a component in some ongoing research I'm doing about religious satire. Every episode includes an interview, and I'm very enthusiastic about today's interview. It is with author, scholar, teacher, humor researcher, Prof McGraw. Professor McGraw joined me by Skype a few weeks ago, and I will be sharing with you the conversation that we had. Also, I will, in addition to my interview with Professor McGraw, we will have an update from the Rapid Hutch as well. And before we get into that, I actually have another announcement to make. I haven't made too many of these types of announcements over the past year and a half, but let me catch you up to date on something that's been going on, something I'm a little bit excited about. I hope you can, hear the enthusiasm in my voice. To the 7 people who listen to this podcast, you already know that this podcast is part of the research I'm doing on a book I'm writing. And I'm in conversations with a publisher and an editor, and that's developing naturally. That's been all along the past couple of years. But I'm adding a new phase to this journey of mine. If you look at the website for this podcast, it says, "One man's wild and weird journey into the world of religious satire." I do stand-up comedy. I teach stand-up comedy. I'm writing a book about religious satire. I do this podcast about religious satire. So I'm adding something new to this project. So this is the first time I've talked about this on the podcast, and that is that I'm adding a new stand-up comedy special to this project. The special is currently under the same, banner, The Comical Heathen. I am right now announcing for the first time to the general public the first performance of the Comical Heathen live show. If I had a special effects man or an Ed McMahon or a fan, friend, or listener, that's where the wild and raucous applause would break out. You'll just have to imagine that in, the sonic space of your imagination. Anyway, what the heck am I talking about? So I'm going to be doing a live Comical Heathen show. The date is October 20th, and this is in Cleveland. I am based in Northeast Ohio. This is in Cleveland. It's going to be at a venue called the Super Electric Pinball Parlor. The Pinball Parlor is a venue that is used for comedy shows. It overlaps, interacts with the Cleveland Comedy Festival. It is located in the 78th Street Studios, which is a converted warehouse that's now used as gallery space and other kind of fun and hip happenings in that part of Cleveland. Tickets are $5. They'll be available at the door or online. I will have a link to where you could get tickets in the description of this podcast. I want to say that this show is possible because of the assistance of a couple of people. So I want to mention them. I want to especially thank John Wellington. People in the Cleveland comedy scene know John. He's been around for many years. He's one of the co-founders of the Cleveland Comedy Festival. And he's very supportive of young comics, local comics, regional comedy, developing shows, developing material, running workshops. And he's just like a real positive energy type of guy. And he helps run the comedy shows at the Pinball Parlor. So he's worked with me to make this possible. He has another comedian who he works with at the parlor called Logan Rashaw. Logan and I have done shows together as well over the years. We did some Bonkers shows a couple of years ago when Bonkers had a regular room in Cleveland. We got to know each other, and he is helping out. So thank you, John. Thank you, Logan. Kristen Galewood is helping me design the graphics that go with it. My daughter Kaylee is helping me design some of the additional branding material. And the show will have an opener. So the show will be me doing about an hour of original satire, mostly religious, some social, some political. And it is inspired by this podcast. So if you've listened to more than 3 episodes of this podcast, you know that every episode includes a rant, a screed, a speech, a reaction of some kind, usually to something in the news, newspapers, headlines. So what I'm trying to do, folks, is almost like a remix of the greatest hits. Go through each rant, find my favorite parts, either because they're funny or because I like what I'm trying to say, and then, take them home, edit it, develop it, and create an hour of new material based on some of the topics and some of the rants I've already done on this podcast. So if you listen to the podcast, please, first of all, tell other people. Let's get the word out. This is a unique podcast. We discuss religion and we discuss comedy. Two popular topics for podcasts, by the way. But there are not very many podcasts that have brought those two spheres together in the Venn diagram kind of way that my research does and that this podcast does. And that this show will do. I did say I will have an opener. The opener for the show will be John Hensler. If you're in the Northeast Ohio Cleveland scene, you know John. He's a well-known figure. He's a local satirist, wit. Very active on Facebook. If you want to have entertaining discussions, arguments on Facebook, you should friend John Hensler. There'll be more information in the description of this podcast, but hey, that is my announcement. The first ever live Comical Heathen show, October 20th, the Electric Pinball Parlor in Cleveland. Tickets are $5. I'm going to do this show a few times in the Cleveland area over the next few months. When I get it to where I really want it to be, it's going to be the basis of a tour, probably during the month of 2020. So, give me some feedback, give me some support. If there's episodes that you liked, if there's topics that you find interesting, if there's jokes that sort of landed with you. Also, there's the 7 people who listen to this podcast. I don't know what 7 cities you're in, so let me know what 7 cities you're in, and I will come to those 7 cities. And we'll try to keep this going. All right, so live Comical Heathen show. There you go. You got it. What else is going on in my life? Well, me and my wife, we are rabbit enthusiasts, if that's the correct expression. And so we keep a couple of beautiful little Holland Lops, Kelvin and Newton. They both have those long hanging ears that Holland Lop type rabbits have. They don't have the sticky uppy ears like you see in Magic Acts. These are the droopy down ears. And our rabbits have a play area in the living room. We keep them indoors. And, of course, they have cages and litter boxes and all that. And we line the cages of the rabbits' cages with newspapers. And this has had a kind of ironic side effect. And what I'm referring to is reading newspapers. I mean, who the heck reads paper newspapers anymore? Well, I do, because I read the headlines while I'm putting them into the rabbit cages. So in this 21st century world of social media and digital editions and e-journals and all of electronic media, I've gone back to reading old-fashioned newspapers just because of having pet rabbits. Sometimes I see a headline will pop out at me because it contains misinformation. I consider misinformation a sin, and so I try to correct and fact-check as much as I can. A common type of headline that always catches my eye is if it's something about religion or the supernatural, the paranormal, alternative medicine. These topics are often not actually covered very well in journalism. They're treated as soft journalism. The writers and reporters who write about them often do what's called a kind of a transcription reporting, where they just get the information from their subjects and just repeat about like interesting going-ons, and who knows if people even take it seriously. So anyway, that's kind of why you get some pretty bad journalism sometimes with these kinds of topics. And when I see a headline like that, I've got to set the record straight. I mean, I am not trying to ruin everybody's good time. It may be your dogma, but it's my karma. And I was putting newspapers into the bottom of the rabbit cage when a particular newspaper headline caught my gaze. I stood there, mesmerized. I was captivated. I couldn't look away. I stared and stared. You are focused on the headline. You are getting sleepy, sleepier, sleepier. Your body is relaxing. Your mind is empty. All I could see was this headline. Hypnotherapist helps clients make changes. By Tanya Missigers. July 29th, 2019, in the Winnipeg Daily News. Apologies to Miss Missigers, I think that's how you pronounce her name. Hypnotherapist helps clients make changes. Having read the article, a more honest and accurate headline would have read, Midlife Career Changer, asking $90 an hour to slightly relax you. What do you think when you hear the word hypnosis? The word brings up a lot of different ideas. From stage hypnotists who make people cluck like chickens, to stories about past lives, to helping people stop smoking, to helping people rob banks in movies like Now You See Me, to simple relaxation exercises. Well, this article starts by assuring us, in this case, hypnotherapy has nothing to do with making someone cluck like a chicken. But what if I want to cluck like a chicken? What if I have some sort of avian fetish? You've heard of furries, people who dress up like stuffed animals. What if I'm a feathery? If she won't make me cluck like a chicken, that's discrimination. Hey, this actual specific article is about a woman, Kim Palmer. Kim Palmer, it turns out, just very recently got certified and started a home-based practice. And that's it. That's everything this article has to tell us about the hypnotherapist in the headline. There's no further context about why the author decided to write about this woman, how this woman got into hypnotherapy, how she was making a living before, nothing about other hypnotherapists in the area, or, and I would consider this next one to be like a big one, whether hypnotherapy actually works. This is frankly such a piss-poor standard for journalism. Forget beating the old shoe leather, as old school reporters used to say. Miss Missingers didn't even have to get out of her pajamas to write this tripe. She gives us such an unbalanced and unnecessarily favorable account of this new age bullshit. It's like Deepak Chopra fucked a typewriter and this article is their love child. And I noticed that this hypnotherapist's name is Palmer. Seems like an ironic name for something that is considered, by some people, a con job. Like she's palming your money. At least her sister Rosie is working for her Benjamins. But I don't want to stoop to making fun of people's names. That'd be a little too playgroundish and a little too presidential. Hey, the rest of this article just reads like an advertisement. It pulls descriptions of the treatment just from the woman, Palmer, from her website, and from the website of the organization that has supposedly certified her. You know, it says the treatment is certified as fully compliant with the ethical standards of the American Medical Association. Womp womp. Wrong. Fooled you. Nah, I'm just kidding. What it does say is it was designed to adhere to the standards of the National Guild of Hypnotists. If you haven't heard of the National Guild of Hypnotists, they rank right in credibility, right in there, somewhere between the Association of Australian Surfer Groupies and the Alliance of Former Trump Press Secretaries. And, for the record, if I have to say this, most medical associations do not endorse hypnotherapy, and when they do mention it, it is in very tepid terms, with phrases like insufficient evidence or insufficient research being common. I'll give you an example. Here's a real-life example. A 2018 publication by the American Academy of Family Physicians on the dangers of smoking included a chapter on the many ways that people try and quit. So, of course, they gave hypnotherapy a mention, saying of it, and I quote, insufficient evidence. Ouch! You never want a girl or a medical journal to use those words to describe you. So, what do you think of Jerry? Does he cure what ails ya? Insufficient evidence. Imagine it on Jeopardy. Alex Trebek reads the clue. Insufficient evidence. A contestant rings in. Does hypnosis help people quit smoking? Sorry, Jim, we were looking for. How is Jerry in bed? In short, there's absolutely nothing in this article that you wouldn't find in a paid advertisement for this woman's newly opened business. No personal details about the practitioner, Miss Palmer, no mention of competitors, no prom photos with embarrassing haircuts. Nothing. And let's face it, hypnotherapists are basically selling an invisible product that can never not work, as long as they can keep their clients happy. It's like Deepak Chopra fucked a typewriter and, Wait a minute, we did that one already. But it still applies. Look, pseudoscience and pseudomedicine are often marked by slippery claims, slippery logic, slippery language while making vague, slippery promises. This hypnotherapist's use of language is more slippery than a wet floor at a lube factory. It's more slippery than a duck with an enema or a penguin on a slip and slide. It's more slippery than the Voting Rights Act in Texas. She talks what might sound like a good game, but when you listen carefully, she is using words and phrases that aren't very specific or particularly meaningful, words like natural and happiness and hypnotherapist. She's charging $90 an hour. I could almost pay off my student loans at that rate. And what does she sell for that price? Her website says she will release your negativity. And remember, folks, released negativity is measured in metric square tons of bullshit. Like they said on Jaws, we're going to need a bigger boat. We're going to need a bigger boat. Palmer claims that hypnosis is completely natural, which in alternative medicine branding, the word natural is sometimes used as if that were a synonym for healthy, or good for you, or inadmissible in a court of law. Hey, not everything natural is good for you. My ex-wife is natural, but she's also as poisonous as arsenic and she can bite your leg off like a shark. All of which are natural. Ex-wife jokes. Classic. At least hypnosis is a fun word to say. It sounds so, hip. Sounds like something a hipster would do while eating a kale muffin while listening to an all-female Japanese taiko group drum Imagine Dragon covers in Brooklyn. As an aside, I would totally pay $90 an hour to listen to an all-female Japanese taiko group drum Imagine Dragon covers. Instead of hypnosis, hopnosis is when you get hypnotized by the cuteness of bunnies. My wife has hopnosis bad, real bad. She just sits on the couch for hours, doing nothing but staring at Kelvin and Newton. Hopnosis, fuck, I'm clever. As an aside, that joke does not work as good for hippopotanosis. The way Miss Palmer's website promises that all of your tomorrows will be happy reminds me of that kid Pedro's speech in the movie Napoleon Dynamite. If you vote for me, all of your wildest dreams come true. Although, they're not the same, of course. Napoleon Dynamite has a score of 71% on Rotten Tomatoes. Hypnotherapy is Rotten Tomatoes. Speaking of movies, there was hypnosis in the film Now You See Me, as well as in Woody Allen's movie Curse of the Jade Scorpion. In both of those films, criminals use hypnosis as part of an elaborate heist, which may have been the most realistic description ever of hypnosis. An elaborate heist of the cashola in your wallet. In the movie The Hot Rock with Robert Redford, they hypnotize a bank manager to get him to open a safe deposit box with the trigger words, Afghanistan, banana stand. Afghanistan, banana stand. God, that's fun to say. But though nowadays, that might be considered racist or maybe even fruitist. Hypnotherapists use trigger words to get unsuspecting victims to open their wallets. Words like hypnotherapist. Since I'm obsessed with shoddy reporting and stories like this, I did a little more digging and found that this same intrepid reporter, whose name I can't pronounce correctly, wrote another advertisement disguised as an article just one short year ago for this same woman's At the Time business, which in those days was a home printing shop. And this woman sure likes to work from home. And I mean both of them. I kept looking for one of those, paid content tags you see sometimes on articles like this. But nope. The Winnipeg Daily News considers this a real honest-to-gosh news story. Hey, I'm going to include links to both these articles in the description of this podcast for your reference. I mentioned stage hypnosis at the top of this rant. I do want to say that's a whole other thing again. I have a friend of mine who wrote her PhD on stage, the theatrics of stage hypnotists. I'm a great fan of the entertainment value of stage hypnotists. My friend who did the study said it was very similar to just actors doing relaxation exercises. Close your eyes, do some deep breaths, and prepare to be creative. And if you've ever seen a stage hypnotist, they usually start with a kind of a large group. I've seen this a few times over the years. Once a stage hypnotist came to my high school and brought like 50 people on stage. And they did a couple simple things like a jumping jacks or barking like a dog. But as the show goes on, especially the first few minutes, the stage hypnotist sends people back to their seats. They're weaning out the ones who aren't into it. And by the end, they get like often just to like one person who is like totally into it. And again, I don't know what that one person is experiencing. I can't read their mind. I can't know what's in their heart. But I do know that I once was that one person. Those of you who know me know I did my master's degree at Brown University. And while I was there, the theater department brought a stage hypnotist to a midnight show. So that means it was a little R/X rated as well. And they brought up about a dozen of us, of which I was one. And we did some relaxation exercises for like a minute. And talk about shooting theatrical fish in a hypnotized barrel. These were all theater kids. We were all ready to get on stage and act like chickens. Avian fetish or no. So it was fun. It was funny. We got down on the floor in little lumps, and you would say different types of vegetables. Be a kiwi, be a tomato, be a broccoli. And we all just like blah, blah, blah around on the stage. Because that's what we would do in acting classes and in rehearsals. And it was a midnight show. There were not very many sober people in that room, I suspect. At one point, we got down about 6 people, and he said, let's make an orgy. Nothing actual pornographic happened, but, people were hugging and near each other, And then, I said I was like the last one. I was part of the very last thing. What happened was, I'm down on the floor with my eyes closed, like in some little ball, doing some sort of goofy game. I never felt, by the way, out of control, like I was being compelled by mysterious mesmerism. I was very relaxed. I'm very expressive. I was very open to suggestions. Again, like many actors and many young actors are. So I was on the ground, my eyes closed. And the stage hypnotist said, I'm going to let you, the audience, pick 2 people to go backstage and have sex. Just knowing my classmates and my friends, and I could feel it coming. I could feel it coming, eyes closed, face on the floor. By very first name, like 10 people shouted, Jerry, Jerry. Okay, so, easy to predict. I'm definitely like the marked card in that deck. But then they have to pick the second person. And the name I hear is Blair. Pick Blair, Blair. And with my eyes closed, it did occur to me that Blair could be a girl's name or a boy's name. And this was Brown University in the 90s, my friends. It was a boy's name. So we stood up, me and this other young man. The stage hypnotist said, okay, I compel you, go backstage and have sex. And when you're done, come back out and tell us all about it. And me and Blair went backstage. And we're backstage. And as soon as we were backstage, it was just like the veil was lifted. We started laughing. It was like obviously awkward. We're both like young actors who are up for a game. We're both young actors who might be up for anything, theatrically or sexually. What the heck? But, no one was having sex. What we did was we set up like a little quick 5-second improv scene. I think I took my shirt off and he unbuttoned the top of his pants. And then I cuddled under his arm, sort of like as the submissive one. And then we walked back out on stage with just like a drunken swagger, a hubba hubba look. The audience went nuts with the laughter. And the hypnotist interviewed us a little bit, but I think he knew not to push it too far. I don't know. We just gave one-word answers like, yeah, oh, good. Silly stuff like that. So I have been not only the participant in a stage hypnotist act, but I was actually the last person who's the person who will do anything. And I guess I didn't do anything in the X-rated sense, but I did participate in the last joke or gag of this show. Hey, it was fun. It was fun. But I can tell you, I never did anything that I was compelled beyond my will to do. So I just wanted to share that kind of personal story. On a final note, going back to my article, on a final note about the article, the reporter quotes testimonials from Miss Palmer's website. No, she didn't even interview the clients herself, just quoted them off the website, she'd have to put on clothes and got off the couch. Now, these were some positive comments, and if anyone finds hypnotherapy helpful, I wish you well. Hey, life is fucking hard enough. If hypnotherapy is helping someone, then hey, I'm not going to just punch you in the mouth. But I will say, scientifically speaking, testimonials are just anecdotes. They're just one person's experience, and anecdotal evidence is not considered strong evidence. But in this case, it is even worse. We cannot trust what these people are saying. After all, they've been hypnotized. Hey, let's be open-minded to the evidence. Here, let me see if hypnosis really works. Afghanistan, banana stand. There, done. I look forward to receiving all of your checks and money orders. I gotta find some way to pay off these student loans. And that is what I found at the bottom of the rabbit hutch today. And that leads us to today's interview. Today's interview is with Peter McGraw. Peter McGraw is a professor at the University of Colorado, where he runs something known as the Humor Research Lab. We talk about his lab in the interview and what the work is that goes on there. He is best known for a book that he co-authored with Joel Warner called The Humor Code. We talk about the Humor Code in the interview, and so I'll let you hear about it there. I will say the Humor Code and Professor McGraw's research in general has generated a concept in humor studies known as benign violation. Maybe you've heard that, maybe you haven't, but benign violation. And we will discuss both benign violation and its potential application to satire and religious satire in the interview. I'm going to mention two other quick things. If you have been listening to this podcast, or if you haven't, there's an earlier episode where I interviewed well-known television writer and producer Dan O'Shannon. And Dan's been on this podcast. He's on my other podcast once. He is from the Cleveland area. He comes back, to town, and he is a great supporter of local comedians and local artists, and I really appreciate him. And I just want to say, in that interview, the Comical Heathen interview episode with Dan O'Shannon, we discussed Peter McGraw. He comes up in the conversation. So that was sort of like a nice little funny coincidence that the two interviews are kind of connected there. Peter McGraw and Joel Warner have a epigram at the beginning of their book. This is a famous quote by E.B. White. E.B. White is known for writing Charlotte's Web, those of you who are paying attention at home. And E.B. White once said this of studying humor: humor can be dissected as a frog can, but the thing dies in the process, and the innards are discouraging to any but the pure scientific mind. And then Professor McGraw and Mr. Warner add, let's kill some frogs. And that's how they introduce their book, The Humor Code. And I do want to mention, I guess, anyone who studies humor academically falls into this like a gray area. Can you study humor, or what can happen? It's such a unusual psychological and physiological and social and artistic phenomenon. Laughter, humor, comedy, these are all different things, but similar things, and so on. So these are the themes of his book, and these are the themes of this podcast. And I was so grateful that Professor McGraw agreed to let me interview him. I'm going to say one last thing about the interview. I'm in the Cleveland area. He is not. We did this interview by Skype, and I used a computer that I do not normally use. It's just a computer I had access to at the appointed time of the interview. And this came out a little more Skypey than usual. It's still very listenable to. Maybe I shouldn't even mention it. Now you're going to notice it and bitch about it, whereas maybe you wouldn't have. If you know anything about audio engineering, I always subscribe to the advice that you should control your sonic environment. And using a different computer than the one that I usually use did not leave me in a position of controlling my sonic environment. I mean, you can hear Professor McGraw, and what he says is very interesting and worth hearing. And always when I have like a technical glitch, I feel like I should apologize to my guest because they're entrusting me. And so it sounds good. I wouldn't share it if it didn't sound good. I do want to say that the second rule of audio engineering, audio editing, is compress the shit out of it. So that compression tool was helpful for this editing this interview. So with that said, please enjoy my interview with Professor McGraw. Hello, this is your host, Dr. Jerry Jaffe, the world's most highly educated stand-up comedian, and I'm very pleased today to be joined by my interview guest. This is a writer and researcher whose work I've followed for many years, and I was so thrilled when he agreed to be interviewed for this project, Professor Peter McGraw. Hello, Peter.
Hello, nice to be on the line with you.
Peter, you're known for your humor research lab at the University of Colorado, as well as your book, The Humor Code, both of which we'll talk about in a moment, as well as your podcast, I'm Not Joking.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Well, we got to blame somebody, so it might as well be you. I followed just online and some of the publications that have come out of the Humor Research Lab, but for the sake of people listening, what is the Humor Research Lab? Like, what is this thing you've created?
So, a lot of people like to think that the lab is like this space with shelves filled with whoopee cushions,
right?
Rubber chickens, and so on. But unfortunately, it's always disappointing for people to find out what it is. Essentially, a group of faculty and students who are interested in studying this, challenging, perplexing yet important topic. And so it's essentially a place of people, not a place of things.
Sure.
So the goal, of course, is to try to understand the antecedents and consequences of humor. So what makes things funny, and what's the implications for living a good or not so good life.
Excellent. As a fellow academic, I often worry about words. So I wonder why you chose the word humor. Like, it's not the comedy, or it's not the comedy and tragedy, or something like that. It's the humor. So why is that the word you latched onto?
No, that's an interesting question. We actually really puzzled over, and actually many of our papers we spend a lot of time talking about definitions and language.
Sure.
So what we have settled on, and so the issue is that the word humor can have three different meanings in the literature. So on one hand, it could mean what we refer to it as this sort of experience, psychological experience that has an emotional, a cognitive, and a behavioral element to it. So the emotional is amusement, the pleasantness of humor. The cognitive, which is the judgment, the recognition that something is funny or not. And then the behavioral, which is laughter, right?
Okay.
This expression of these things. And so the second meaning that you find in the literature is humor being referred to as not the experience, but rather the stimulus. That causes this. So we use the word comedy for that. So whether it be jokes or eye rolls or people falling down the stairs or memes, whatever those things may be.
Sure.
And then the last thing is this sort of tendency to either be funny or to laugh easily, which we refer to often as a sense of humor or a sort of comedic style there. Sure. So our interest was primarily focused on, as I said, the antecedents and consequences. So more psychologists or behavioral scientists, mainly, and so we were interested in that part of it rather than the comedy per se. Although it's impossible to study humor without also being focused on comedy or being considering comedic styles or sense of humor.
My background is in theater. I mention that because when we teach class on comedy, or I teach a class on comedy in any form, from Shakespeare to stand-up, it would probably be about the second two definitions would be the more pedagogically active.
I'm a bit envious of your ability to teach that class.
I'm going to put that in my faculty review this year. Just to piggyback on use of the word humor, perhaps you're well known for being the co-author of the book, The Humor Code. Well known in certain circles. It's surely on every bibliography of anyone studying comedy at this point. I've read it. It's structured as a travel log, which I enjoyed. I lived in Japan for a while as well, so I have connections to some of those anecdotes. But be that as it may, what's the Humor Code book about?
Yeah, so essentially the Humor Code came out of a failed attempt for me to do stand-up at an open mic in Denver, Colorado.
Sure.
I had been invited by a journalist who then became my co-author, Joel Warner.
Yes, Joel Warner.
Joel wanted me to to go to this dive bar with him and critique the comedians or the wannabe comedians.
Sure.
Why were they funny? Why were they not funny? Use the work from Hurl to do this from Humor Research Lab.
Okay.
And in a moment of optimism, hubris, I suggested that I tell some jokes. And as I've already ruined that punchline, which is I got up and completely bombed.
Sure, as you do.
Not unusual. Of course, this led to a kind of reckoning. And that is that humor, if you want to crack the humor code, you do need a laboratory, I believe. You need to be able to run studies and test hypotheses. But you need more than that. That is, you need the richness of experience out in the real world. And so Joel and I decided to team up and to go out into the real world to complement what we had been doing and what I've been doing in Hurl with my colleagues. The humor code is exactly that, is the outcome of a global expedition. So, we go to these different places, Japan, the Amazon, Denmark, Los Angeles, New York, and so on, Palestine even, to with each place to try to answer a question related to humor, its creation or its consequences.
Sure. I highly recommend the book. I like your anecdote. Of course, I always tell people that open mic is like parachuting. You should try it at least once. I've never parachuted, though, so I haven't taken my own advice completely. In the humor code, you do have like a central organizing theory, the benign violation theory. What is that? What is the benign violation?
So, essentially, we were kind of late to the party when it comes to presenting a theory of humor. There's 2,500 years of theory and hundreds of theories.
Yes.
This was an attempt to be, I think, really quite integrative. That is, that we wanted to try to take the sort of best elements of these theories and create a general purpose theory of humor. Okay. Essentially, the idea is it's rather simple, and we illustrate it with the Venn diagram.
Sure.
Sort of two overlapping elements. That is that we laugh at, we're amused by, we judge funny, things that are wrong yet okay. Okay. Things that are threatening yet safe. Okay. Things that don't make sense yet make sense, and as we call them, benign violations. Okay. So, you can imagine a world of things that are benign, a world of things that are threatening to the way we see the world ought to be. We call them violations. And the things that have both of those elements to them at the same time are the things we tend to laugh at.
You have a go-to example?
Well, the go-to example I like is tickling. Tickling is a harmless attack. Right. That is, that elicits laughter when it's done by someone you trust in a way that's not too aggressive. Sure. And tickling can be used to show one of the puzzles related to humor. Okay. And that is, why is it that some attempts to make people laugh cause them to be bored? Okay. And why do some attempts cause people to be angry, upset, disgusted, etc.? Sure. And so tickling doesn't always elicit laughter. Sometimes it elicits yawns, whether you try to tickle yourself, for example. Sure. The situation is purely benign. And sometimes it elicits, fear, screams, and so on. And that's like if a creepy guy in a trench coat tries to tickle you. Sure. So I like tickling also because I think, physical comedy, really rough and tumble play and tickling are kind of the most basic and most universal form of actions that cause humor. And
it seems that part of this is putting it on the what's going on with people when they laugh. So your background is as a behavioral psychologist. Yeah. So it's sort of is resting on what's eliciting laughter.
Well, yeah. So laughter is not necessary for humor, but but the sort of strongest cases of humor are usually laughter is accompanying that positive emotion, that judgment. Laughter is an interesting puzzle. That is, why is it that we laugh? So there are a lot of behavioral expressions of emotions. Okay. So for example, tears when people cry, or smiles when people are joyous, and so on. Laughter is an interesting one because it is it's verbal, but it lacks language.
Okay.
It's this universal thing, right? So whether it be a baby or someone from another culture, we can all agree that that person is amused when we see them laughing.
Okay.
Or at least trying to seem amused in the case of fake laughter. And so this is actually really striking because we can also find forms of laughter in other types of mammals, most notably non-human primates like apes and monkeys and bonobos and chimps and so on. But there's even some evidence of something that akin to laughter in such simple mammals as rats.
Interesting.
When jostled and tickled and kind of being kind of gently jostled and tickled by rats in a lab, by the rats in a lab, it elicits this sort of ultra sonic kind of chirping sound.
Sure.
It's really fascinating.
When I try to explain benign violation in classes where it's relevant, my go-to example is the Three Stooges, because there's at least partially elucidates in a way like, why do some people find the Three Stooges funny? They're violent, but they don't really hurt each other, and so people who love it just laugh hysterically, but other people are either turned off by the violence or find it boring.
Indeed, yes. I think slapstick is probably the next level of universal. That is that it can cross cultures and time, but it doesn't make everyone laugh because some people just aren't quite comfortable with that level of aggression.
Yes. Excellent. Well, thank you. I'm going to just segue a little bit into the topic of my study, which is religious satire. In the book, The Humor Code, satire does come up. It comes up a few times in the chapter on Palestine. I wonder, does either the Humor Code or Benign Violation elucidate anything about satire for you?
Well, okay, so this is... I find satire to be a really fascinating case study, and frankly, I haven't really written much about it. And
sure.
So I'm sort of limited in my expertise. I sort of feel like I need to write about something to truly become an expert. But I think the interesting thing about satire is that it's an interesting case study of comedy as a tool.
Okay.
We have started thinking about the consequences of humor. So that is like, how do you use comedy? Right? So beyond just entertaining yourself, right? So, so clearly when people think about humor, they think of kind of exemplar of people going to a comedy club,
right?
Watching stand-up or watching a rom-com, or a sitcom or something like that, and with the goal of kind of escaping the world and laughing and feeling good and bonding with others, And so, while that is maybe the exemplar, it's actually a very small part of the things that make humor in our lives. These things come from small talk and playful times with our partners or children.
Yes.
And so on. But not all comedy is really designed to bring people together.
Okay.
That is that sometimes comedy is designed to be divisive, to draw a line in the sand between us and them.
Right.
Sometimes comedy is designed to try to change behavior, and to point out what's wrong and unfair in the world, and to shine a light on the ugliness of the world. And so, satire is sort of the idea of kind of, making fun of those in power.
Right.
That satire is designed to do what I think the average comic really wants to do, which is to punch up and to tear down the unjust, the unfair, the powerful, that kind of lost their perspective on the common man and woman.
And it would seem to me, I'm just trying to line up the ideas of the humor code and benign violation, and like the phrase punching up, there must be a kind of violation, like comedian's going to disrespect the president, or the comedian's going to call out the church. So it would seem to be heavy on violation and light on benign, though if they go too far, so there must be still an element of like the playful clown.
Yes, indeed.
In the balancing act.
I think you're right about the sort of violation, the wrongness, right? So by virtue, these are critiques oftentimes, right? And so what critiques are doing is pointing out what's wrong with the world. They're criticizing, and we have norms about we should be polite, and we should not criticize, and we should, and if we do, we should do it privately,
right,
and so on. And so yes, you're right about the heaviness on the violation. Now of course, there has to be, for it to be funny, there has to be something okay, right, or benign about it. Where does that come from? So I think one place that it comes from is the fact that it's actually okay to critique people in power.
Sure.
That is, that the nature of the power dynamic makes it easier for things to be funny when you're punching up than punching down. And then a second one, and this is the harder one to sort of quantify, but yet is, I think, equally important, which is actually the genius of the comic. That is the ability to take this and not just make it a complaint, but make it what we would call in the humor research lab a humorous complaint. That is to find a way to make this more playful, to make it fun, to find the ironies, to use double entendres, you know what I mean, to make this comedic. And that's a much more of a kind of case-by-case basis.
Sure.
And then, of course, along the way, recognizing that some people want these critiques to be said and some people don't want these critiques to be said. And so, when you're making jokes about the Pope, a devout Catholic, no matter how great the comedy is, may not be happy about that.
That's right.
And the agnostic or the atheist or otherwise might really appreciate it. And so these audience effects are non-trivial.
I'm exploring a premise, which is that in sort of the middle aughts, there are these writers that are now called the New Atheists, Dawkins and Hitchens and Sam Harris and so forth, emerged a few years after September 11th. I don't think you'd refer to them as a group, like they're not a school, they don't have a manifesto. But the idea seems to be to aggressively push back on the role of religion in sort of mainstream society or politics or education. In that framework, I think certainly there are at least some comedians who's joined in, sort of pro-skeptic, pro-science, pro-agnostic or atheist, and sort of aggressively so. And Bill Maher's the most famous, but I think there are others like Eddie Izzard or Jim Jeffries, kind of to mention. Anyway, there are others, Ricky Gervais. I was wondering, maybe a way to phrase the question for you is just in your study of humor, did you observe any post-September 11th trends in comedy, be it satire, social media, or just anything that you noticed that you think is interesting?
I'm not a good person to answer that question. The one thing that I can say that was very noticeable was this sort of moratorium on laughs, that how the sort of comedy scene dried up for a period of time.
Yes.
And how there was sort of waiting, kind of comics sort of, largely, especially the sort of mainstream, television, late night shows, etc., waiting for when it could be okay to joke again.
Yes.
And one of the things in the humor code that we did was take a look at The Onion, the satirical paper, and how they were one of the first to really come out and make jokes about 9/11. And the brilliant thing that they did was that they didn't punch down. They were not making jokes about the victims, but rather about the perpetrators.
Right.
And that issue that came out that did this, I think it's widely regarded as one of the best issues ever, and helped. And really, they were flooded with thank yous for people who were appreciative of their efforts and their success, and the fact that they were using comedy as this tool to punch back at terror.
Well, Peter, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate all your insights and thoughts.
That's great. Well, I'm excited to hear more about what you're up to, and I'm super flattered by your interest, and I'm pleased that our work's been able to be a little bit of a help.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I really appreciate Prof McGraw's both his time and his insights in talking about his book, The Humor Code. I'd say the main thrust of it is the benign violation. The concept of benign violation will, be referenced, incorporated into the book I'm writing. So, in addition to having his publications, just having it in his own words is a great asset to my project. So I really thank him. And I do think there is something, in this area of satire, of the benign and the violation, like speaking truth to power, as it's sometimes called. That's a kind of violation. You were supposed to respect the Pope and the President and your parents. And so it's automatically a little bit of a violation. Of course, if you live in a Western-style democracy, we're more empowered to speak up to people in power. So does that make it less of a violation? And then also in terms of being benign, if satire is too soft, Jim Gaffigan making jokes about being raised Catholic, which are hilarious, by the way, but it's not really satire. But if the satire becomes if the criticism in the satire becomes too acidic, is there a point in which it's not funny? It's because it's too much of a violation. Does the joke go too far? Of course, comedians are always navigating those kinds of questions. So anyway, hey, I really appreciate it, Professor McGraw, and I appreciate you for listening to the podcast. If you've made it this far, we're almost to the end. All I need to do is say some thank yous. I definitely need to thank my friend Jeff Geddert. He provides me advice on audio engineering as well as some written material for the podcast. I want to thank my friend Mark Bell. Mark Bell is playing that beautiful Bach organ that you hear in this podcast. Mark tours the world playing church organs, and I was so grateful that he shared his CD with me and said I could sample from it. You should look up his CD if you like organ music. This podcast is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbean. Whatever platform you're listening to it on, please like it, please share it, please leave a nice comment. The more likes and ratings and shares we get, these things can grow. So I really appreciate you. We do have a email address as well. It's just thecomicalheathen@gmail.com. So, email us your comments. Email us suggestions for topics. If you find a unusual or funny article about religion or pseudoscience or stuff like that, forward it to me. I'd love to see it. And finally, I would just like me, your host, Dr. Jerry Jaffe, to thank you for listening to this episode of The Comical Heathen. Thank you.